Have you ever woken up in the morning and felt absolutely nothing? No joy, no sadness, just a stunning silence inside you, like something vital has slipped away. At first you might call it exhaustion, burnout, a bad mood, but deep down, you know it's something else, something deeper, something existential. You look at your life, and the things that used to move you don't move you anymore. Your goals feel hollow. Your routines feel robotic. Your relationships feel like echoes of a person you once were or pretended to be. And then, there it is, the thought nothing really matters. It doesn't come as a scream. It comes as a whisper, a quiet, terrifying truth that sits in your chest like a heavy stone. You find yourself looking at the world and wondering, what's the point of all this? Why am I even doing anything at all? You try to keep going, you distract yourself, you scroll, you work, you socialize, but that feeling still lingers. Persistent, hidden beneath every smile, every task, every conversation. That emptiness, that silence. The growing suspicion that none of this is real or meaningful, and that you're just playing along, hoping no one else notices that you've checked out. And maybe worst of all, you can't tell anyone because they'll say it's just a phase. Or worse, they'll think there's something wrong with you. But what if I told you that maybe there's actually nothing wrong with you? What if this sensation you're carrying, this awful, choking emptiness, is not a symptom of something broken in you, but a sign that something deeper is waking up? What if the most terrifying thought you've ever had, nothing matters, is actually the beginning of something sacred? Sometimes, when everything you've built starts to feel meaningless, it's not because your life has collapsed, but because the version of you who created that life is fading. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're becoming aware. You're standing in front of what Viktor Frankl called the existential vacuum, a space inside where the usual motivations no longer work, where the things that once gave you meaning, achievement, validation, pleasure, suddenly dissolve into fog. Frankl believed that this vacuum is not a mental illness, but a natural part of being human in a disconnected world. A world so full of distraction, we rarely stop to ask the most dangerous question of all. Why? Why am I doing this job? Why am I chasing this relationship? Why am I waking up every day, going through the motions, pretending it all means something? Frankl worked with many patients who weren't clinically depressed in a medical sense, but they were spiritually starving. They weren't ill, they were empty. And that emptiness, he said, didn't come from their environment. It came from a loss of connection to meaning. In his words, a life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. And when that purpose collapses, the space it leaves behind feels terrifying. You're left floating in chaos, no ground beneath your feet, no compass in your hand, just this aching sensation that maybe life is just noise covering up the silence. But here's the part most people never tell you, that silence is sacred. Not because it feels good, it doesn't, but because it's the only place honest enough to begin. That silence is the soil where a deeper kind of meaning can finally take root. Because it strips you of the false, all the facades, all the shoulds, all the borrowed dreams you were told to chase. And in that space, the void Frankl described, you're finally left with the one thing that no one can sell you, teach you, or give to you: the freedom to choose your meaning. Frankl survived one of the darkest realities a human being could ever endure: the concentration camps. He saw lives ripped apart in the most inhumane ways, and yet he discovered something paradoxical: that even in the face of horror, some people found meaning in how they responded. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, Frankl wrote, the last of the human freedoms: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That's not a shallow quote to throw at someone who's hurting. That's a roadmap out of the void. Not around the emptiness, but through it, one honest step at a time. When we first begin to feel the emptiness, most of us don't know how to hold it. It's overwhelming, confusing, and most of all, uncomfortable. So, naturally, we try to escape it. Not by leaving our lives, but by covering that emptiness with stimulation. We chase noise, endless content, notifications, food, sex, travel, shopping, status, dopamine. We tell ourselves we're just living fully, but deep down we know what's happening. We're not living, we're running. Running from the silence, running from the stillness that keeps asking us, is this really who you are? Is this really what you want? Frankl warned about this reaction. He called it compensation. When people fail to find meaning, they often turn to pleasure, power, or distraction to fill the gap. But here's the truth: pleasure can numb, it can delay, it can distract, but it can't substitute meaning. Not for long. You can scroll through sunsets in Bali, read 100 how to fix your life posts, even chase spiritual highs, and still end up staring at your ceiling late at night, whispering that same sentence: none of this matters. Because your soul can't be quieted with substitutes. Not for long. It doesn't want stimulation. It wants truth. And truth often comes slow. It doesn't always look good on camera. It's not always aesthetic or motivational. Sometimes it just hurts. But the kind of pain that comes from facing yourself, from finally taking off the mask, is different from the pain of denial. It's the pain of birth. Because deep down, you're not afraid of the void. You're afraid of what it might demand of you. You're afraid that if you stop distracting yourself, you'll have to admit that your life needs to change, that the job no longer feeds you, that the image you've been protecting was never truly you, that the identity you've defended is keeping you small and disconnected. And maybe you're afraid of how much grief is waiting beneath the surface for all the years you spent chasing the wrong things, for the parts of your soul you abandoned just to be accepted, for the self you silenced so you could survive. Escape seems easier, but there comes a point where even escape gets exhausting, where even pleasure stops working. And it's there, at the end of avoidance, that the real work begins. Most people will spend their lives circling the void, avoiding it, scared of what might happen if they fall in. They'll keep themselves numb, distracted, functioning, because somewhere, deep in their unconscious, they believe that if they stop running, the emptiness will swallow them whole. But what if the thing you're afraid of isn't there to destroy you? What if it's there to free you? Carl Jung once wrote, "Only the man who can consciously face his own shadow knows what divine love is." This shadow, this inner collapse, this loss of meaning, is not the end of your life. It's a threshold, not a punishment, but an invitation. Imagine standing at the edge of a deep, dark forest. No map, no light, just your fear. Every instinct is telling you to retreat, to go back to the comfort of the known, even if the known is suffocating. But what awaits on the other side of that forest isn't ruin, it's truth, not the kind someone else gives to you, the kind you discover when everything false has finally fallen away. Frankl believed that suffering becomes bearable, even transcendent, when it's faced with meaning. But that meaning is personal, raw, often silent. There is no universal formula, only the courage to ask the real question. What now? Not how do I fix this, but what truth does this emptiness want to reveal? Because if you sit inside the emptiness long enough, without rushing to cover it, something shifts. First comes grief for the lost selves, the years spent sleepwalking, the efforts to earn love by abandoning yourself over and over again. Then comes silence. Still uncomfortable, yes, but honest. And in that honesty you begin to feel something ancient stir inside you. Not noise, not dopamine, but awareness. Awareness that you've outgrown your old life, that what once worked no longer fits, that the emptiness isn't a failure, but a sign that your new self is trying to emerge. Frankl put it simply: when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This is not the kind of change the world sells you. A quick rebrand, a glow-up, another version of pretending to be okay. This is the quiet transformation that begins deep inside, when you realize you're not here to perform for meaning. You're here to create it. And to do that, you have to face the void, not as your enemy, but as your first honest mirror. So if meaning isn't something we stumble upon in some perfect job, ideal relationship, or grand mission, where does it come from? Viktor Frankl believed that meaning is not something life hands to us. It's something we respond to, something we create through our choices, even in the face of suffering. And in his work, he described 3 fundamental paths, 3 ways we can actively shape a meaningful life, not by avoiding pain, but by transforming how we relate to it. Let's walk through them slowly, because one of these may be the very doorway you've been searching for.
Path 1. Creating or doing something meaningful. What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal. Viktor Frankl.
The first path to meaning is through creation, through doing, but not aimless productivity, not hustling for validation. Rather, the deep and personal act of contributing something real to the world. It could be art, a business, raising a child, building something that reflects truth. Even acts of courage, service, care, simple things done with deep intention. You don't need to be extraordinary. You need to be honest. The act of creating, even if no one sees it, awakens something powerful within you. It reminds you that your life matters, not because others applaud, but because you are a vessel of expression. There is meaning in making, in shaping reality with your hands, your words, your presence, in becoming a co-creator of the world you want to inhabit.
Path 2. Experiencing someone or something deeply. Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. Viktor Frankl.
The second path to meaning is relationship, the experience of deep bond, not just with people, but with beauty, with truth, with the world. To see another human being, not as a role or an object, but as a full existence, and to let yourself be seen in return. There is something sacred in presence, in walking beside someone in silence, in holding space for their joy or pain, in simply being here, fully aware, with nothing to prove. This also includes our experience of the world, standing beneath the stars, listening to music that moves the soul, being awestruck by the mountains, or a sunrise, or the sound of rain. Meaning blooms in these moments because they bind us to something larger. They remind us that in this vast, chaotic universe, we are capable of love, of connection, of reverence.
Path 3. The attitude we take towards suffering. Everything can be taken from a person, but the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Viktor Frankl.
The third and perhaps most powerful path is the one we least want to face, the way we respond to pain, to loss, to grief, to things we cannot change. Frankl learned this in the most brutal of conditions, imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, stripped of freedom, of family, of future. He discovered that while so much can be taken from us, there's one thing no one can steal: our choice to rise, even in pieces. Our power to define what this suffering will mean in the story of who we become. When we suffer for something or someone we love, when we endure with integrity, when we refuse to let tragedy steal our compassion, we become larger than our circumstances. This isn't about romanticizing pain. It's about reclaiming it, turning our wounds into wisdom, turning survival into expression, turning the unbearable into something beautifully human. These are the three paths: to create, to love and experience, to endure with meaning. Frankl didn't offer these as advice. He lived them. He watched people collapse into despair, and he watched others rise, even when they had nothing left but courage. You don't need to walk all three at once. Sometimes, just one is enough to lead you through the dark. Sometimes, just the willingness to look for meaning is the beginning of something sacred. And perhaps, if you are in the place where nothing matters anymore, then this is where you decide what will, not what should, not what others expect, but what feels honest to you. By now, maybe you're starting to sense it. That tiny shift, that whisper inside you that dares to ask the question: if nothing matters, then what could I choose to matter? Without realizing it, you've arrived at a rare threshold, a space where everything that wasn't real has been stripped away, leaving only what you are willing to build with your own hands, your own heart, your own voice. This is the freedom most people avoid, because it's terrifying. It's easier when someone else gives you the meaning, the path, the checklist. But Frankl and many before him knew, meaning isn't something you're given. It's something you give. You don't discover your purpose by waiting. You create it by living fully, even when it's uncertain, even when it hurts. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But he also pointed to an even deeper truth, that when traditional meanings collapse, God, society, roles, expectations, we are both cursed and blessed with having to rebuild a structure of meaning ourselves. It can feel crushing at first, but it's also sacred, because the one who creates meaning from nothing is no longer just surviving, they are self-authoring. Albert Camus, who also wrestled with the absurdity of life, said, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me lay an invincible summer." What he meant is this: even when life feels indifferent, even when we face realities that seem hopeless or brutal, we are still the ones who decide how to live. We can rebel not with violence, but with dignity, with presence, with the quiet, dangerous courage it takes to live with meaning in a meaningless world. You are not limited to systems that you didn't build, not to rules you didn't write, not to external validations or hollow routines. You are free to deconstruct what's been imposed and to construct what feels real, alive, true. This is not an escape. This is a return. Return not to old beliefs, but to the deepest possibility that lives in you. The capacity to turn awareness into action, silence into creation, emptiness into a kind of sacred soil for your next becoming. And no, it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be yours. One real step, one genuine moment, one truth you cradle in your chest and hold like a small fire in the dark. That's where meaning begins, not in proving something, but in choosing something. By now you may have realized, the emptiness you're facing isn't asking you to run, it's asking you to listen. Not with your ears, but with your being. You see, what many describe as emptiness is not just emotional silence, it's the dissolving of identity, the falling away of everything you thought you were, and beneath that collapse, a stillness remains, uncomfortably vast, strangely quiet, and yet deeply alive. There's something profound about realizing that your world has lost meaning, because it means you're no longer hypnotized by illusions. You're no longer chasing what doesn't belong to you. You're no longer playing the role they handed to you. And in the depth of that loss, something opens. Eckhart Tolle called it the space between thoughts, a quiet awareness beneath the noise. Krishnamurti called it freedom from the known. It's when the mind stops clinging, when the ego realizes it has nothing left to perform, and the soul begins to wake. In spiritual traditions across the world, they speak of this as initiation, the place you arrive when the false self begins to burn away. The mystics called it the desert. The Buddhists call it emptiness or shunyata, not as a void to fear, but as the real nature of all things, flowing, impermanent, open. Alan Watts once said, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." This is what the emptiness does, when you stop trying to fix it, hide it, fill it. It begins to settle, to deepen, to show you what was always underneath, awareness without identity, presence without pressure. Imagine this: you're sitting, alone, silent, but not broken, not needing to be productive, not needing to find the answer, just here, breathing, being. At first, the mind will resist. It will tell you to get back to chasing. It will scream, "You're wasting time." But time doesn't own you anymore. You've stepped outside the machinery, and in its place, you've met something sacred, a kind of peace that doesn't sparkle on the outside, but anchors you deeply within. Maybe this is why the emptiness felt so painful, not because it was full of nothing, but because it asked more of you than the world ever did. To be still, to be present, to belong to yourself again. And once you've tasted that, even if the world returns to noise, a part of you never forgets the silence, because that's where your soul found its way back home. After everything has collapsed, after the roles have faded and the masks have cracked, what's left? You. A quieter, humbler, more honest version of you. One no longer trying to prove anything, no longer tied to external definitions of success or worth, no longer interested in pretending to be okay. This is the moment after the fall. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just real. And in that reality, you realize you're still here. You're still breathing, still able to choose. And that quiet return of agency is when the real life begins. Because now every step you take is yours, not borrowed, not imposed, not driven by fear or ego. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. Maybe you wake up and decide, I'm no longer doing work that drains my soul, or I will speak my truth even if it shakes, or simply, I will pause, I will feel, I will live slowly. This is integration, not running from the pain, but folding it into who you are becoming, letting it shape your values, not your fears, letting it carve out space, not for performance, but for presence. And slowly, maybe you stop asking, what should I do? And instead ask, what aligns with who I actually am? You begin to choose based not on desperation, but on resonance, not because it's trending, but because it's true. And this is where everything changes, because you no longer build your life from obligation, but from intention. That's how meaning reemerges, not as something glamorous or sudden, but as something sacred and slow. It grows from the soil of silence, from the ashes of your former self, from the version of you that chose to stay awake, even in the dark. And at some point you look around and realize it's not about being healed, it's about being whole, which includes the scars, the questions, the shadows, the softness. You're not who you were, and that's not a problem. That's liberation. You've walked through something most people never dare to face, and you've come out not untouched, but transformed. And now the rest of your life is an open canvas. Not predictable, not easy, but real and deeply yours. Maybe, just maybe, the most important thing you'll ever realize is this. You are allowed to begin again, not because someone gave you permission, not because the world clapped for your healing, but because you reached the quiet place inside yourself and heard this whisper, you're still here, so there's still more to become. You've witnessed your meaning collapse. You've faced what most avoid. You've stood in silence, not trying to fix yourself, but willing to feel. And now, you're standing on the shoreline of your own life. The tide is pulling back, the noise is softer now, and the question that used to haunt you is now your compass. If nothing matters, what do I now choose to make matter? Not because you have to, not because you need to prove anything, but because you're free. You're free to imagine again, to rebuild, to restore your pain, not erase it, but translate it into something living, something honest, something that only you could give the world. So don't worry about where to start. Start with what feels real, with what brings peace, with what demands truth. And maybe someday, far from now, you'll look back, not at the emptiness as failure, but as the day your life began again. No grand sign, no applause, just a quiet pulse in the dark, saying, now, begin. If this message spoke to something true in you, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, feel free to share it. See you in the next video.